Right, everyone, here it is. The first major interview with one of the Tribes Rivals devs. Thanks to Salty Octopus for setting this up and being allowed to interview Mick Larkins, who is the head of gameplay for Prophecy right now. Let's go straight into it. I did speed up the video a little bit, 1.2, so it is a long interview, and I probably want to say a few things because that's the purpose of this. The devs are talking, the devs are listening, the devs are having a conversation with us. This is big. Let's get straight into it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Salty Octopus, and I'm sitting down with Prophecy Games head of gameplay, Mick, who's agreed to chat with me a little bit about Tribes 3 Rivals, which is in alpha test.
Please note, this is just audio only with some overlay from Salty Octopus, so no cams or whatever. We're just listening to the audio, and you can look at me in the corner.
Right now on Steam, you guys should go check it out. I've been having a blast with it.
I'm
Mick,
not going
thank
to.
you so much for joining me this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing really well, man. Excited to talk about Tribes. As I was kind of talking to you about myself before I hit the record button here, you know, I'm very new to the FPSZ genre. I'm not an old school Tribes player. I'm somebody who's kind of come in very late in the game with Tribes 3, but I'm really
NC was allowed to talk to them.
Enjoying it. And, you know, Tribes players, from what I've learned, are incredibly passionate about their game. There's obviously 20 plus years of history there with players, and so I thought it'd be really fun to kind of sit down and talk to you not only about your background, but also how you're kind of navigating these waters of bringing Tribes 3 into the modern gaming sphere. But let's start with you. Let's let the community know a little bit about some of the folks behind
Where does he live?
Game here and your level of experience and what you're bringing to the table. So first off, I think the most important question is, prior to working for Prophecy Games, like maybe when you were younger, were you a Tribes player growing up, and what other classic games helped shape your foundation as a gamer growing up?
Oh yeah, I've always been a gamer growing up, but really got into the multiplayer shooters of the mid to late 90s. You know, your Dooms and Quakes and those kinds of things. Quake is one of my all-time favorite games. Yeah, I remember when Star Siege Tribes came out, and actually it just celebrated its 25th anniversary. It came out in December of '98.
Oh wow!
And so we were buddies and I got in on it, and it was really radical for the time. You know, it had these really wide open maps, which, you know, we were all used to the dungeons of Quake and Doom and those kinds of things. It was just expansive. It had a ton of players that you could play in a map. It had vehicles. And as I understood it, at least at the time, we played it in a much more strategic way initially. And then once it kind of dawned on us that you could kind of do this jump skiing thing down the hill, which a lot of players figured out pretty quickly, the whole, I think, intent of the game kind of changed. You know, the other kind of radical thing about when Star...
Yeah. So, for those of you not aware, all the tribals are going to sniff at their nose, put their noses up and everything. But skiing was a bug. It was not intended. The devs knew about it. They didn't fix it. So, in development, they knew it was a possibility, right? So, all the maps, like Dangerous Crossing, for instance, weren't really built with skiing in mind. That's why the bridge is there.
Tribes came out was... It beat Quake 3 Arena and I think Unreal Tournament as well to the concept of a game that is just designed to be a multiplayer shooter. That concept didn't really exist too much before then. You know, it was always there was a single player campaign, and then there were multiplayer things added on. But this was meant to be a multiplayer shooter. And so yeah, I've been a fan since the beginning. Was super excited when Tribes 2 released, and you know, you could do like coordinated bomber gameplay, and you know, I think that at Dynamics, the way I understand it, is they tried to address some of the things that that players were doing in Tribes 1, and then they even had to come out with various versions of the Tribes 2, you know, classic and that kind of thing, with depending on playing with player speeds and the mechanics and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think Tribes...
Recreating lightning in a bottle is what they were trying to do, right? So actually make the skiing not a bug, but a functional system. Which, you know, depending on who you ask, was successful or not.
Franchises, and it's one of those games that I think a lot of people, a lot of different game studios, I've heard it firsthand from a lot of people in making very prominent games, say that they looked back at Tribes because it was so forward thinking in a lot of its design philosophies and its network code and things like that. And so it really is the it provides a lot of backbone, I think, to a lot of modern games.
I did a video on my channel about dynamics, and one of the things that I researched was that one of the lead designers at Psyonix, who made Rocket League, said that basically Rocket League is 100% inspired by Tribes in his work.
Right.
We've come full circle.
His work on the Onslaught mode for Unreal before he worked
Onslaught,
on Rocket League was also completely inspired by Tribes, and so it really has had echoes throughout the industry. And it doesn't get enough credit for that because it's considered a very niche genre. And, you know, sure, Quake and id Software has kind of taken the spotlight, especially back in the 90s when it was the king. But there's a lot of history there with Tribes and how much it's brought to the industry.
Also, it doesn't help that the Quake engine basically was in every single game, right? Call of Duty 1, you could still strafe jump. They fixed that. You could rocket jump. They also fixed that out there. But 1.0, Call of Duty 1 was basically enemy territory, and then they patched it out.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. You're an industry veteran. You've been at it for quite a long time here. Are you self-taught, formally educated? You know, how long have you worked in the industry? And tell us a little bit about all the projects that you've been.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I've got a degree in computer science, a bachelor's degree in computer science, and a master's in fine art. And then back when in 2005, so almost 20 years ago, about 19 years ago, Hi-Res Studios formed, and we were very, very small. And so I joined with that group that was starting the studio. There's maybe I don't know, 7 of us or so, and we worked for the first 5 years on our first game, Global Agenda. But a lot of that was also building up the infrastructure of what it takes to make a gaming studio. And then so we did Global Agenda, and then right off of that fairly long development cycle where we iterated a lot of ideas, we were also inspired by Tribes with jetpacks and things like that. We had the opportunity to do a Tribes game with the Star Siege universe, and so that's when a group of us at Hi-Res kind of peeled off and did Tribes Ascend, and so we did that, and then after Tribes, Smite, Paladins, Rogue Company, Realm Royale, DKO, so our sister company over the several years ago broke away for various reasons right across the street from Hi-Res, and so at a certain point it made sense for me to go over there because we were looking at kind of going back to some of our shooter roots, some projects over there, and so through that process we have Tribes 3 now that's in alpha testing. I tend to focus on the gameplay systems, you know, writing the physics code, a lot of the combat code. We also have just an amazing team of really awesome programmers, artists, and the really cool thing too is we are going back to our roots with a lot of this. A lot of the dev team are the original devs that I've been working with for a long time, and a lot of them were originally on Tribes Ascend as well.
That's awesome. No, that's super important to have that veteran experience, especially from a previous title where you guys kind
of that veteran experience with the Tribes community.
know the ropes and can bring that experience into this new game. I'm a very new player to the Tribe series, as I mentioned. You know, I have an arena shooter background, mostly in Quake, so you know they're cousins. You know.
Note, if this is Salty's gameplay, I didn't react on his first time playing the game. Dude's improved. Sure, he's playing not the flag mode, but you know, maybe we'll see some footage there. But there's some definite. I mean, he's a Quake player, right? So he's gonna pick this up, but he's not doing too bad in the background here.
Arena shooters and FPSZ. I'm also an older gamer. Most Tribes players are as the veterans. I don't think there'll ever be an issue of keeping those veterans around. They're here for the long haul. How are you approaching the game for new players? And so what are some things you're trying to do with Tribes 3 to not only bring the series into more of a modern light?
Step 1, what is a flag?
Attract these new players, but more importantly, keep them around.
Well, I mean,
why is it red?
I think it's important to do 2 things. One is to set a clear set of pillars of what our goal is whenever we make a game. And then the second is to make sure you stay true to the IP or the universe that you're working within. And so the tricky thing was working with something that is, I mean, Tribes is a quarter of a century old, which is kind of weird to think about. And the gaming industry, in some ways, has radically shifted. I mean, when Tribes initially came out, the internet was still pretty new, and online gaming was very much a niche. And I think, you know, there's a lot of reasons why Tribes can be kind of regarded almost as like a cult classic. but I think there's also a lot of amazing mechanics in there that you don't find all together in a game. You'll see bits of it, as we were talking before, influencing other games, but you don't find it all together in a game. But at the same time, there have been a lot of different iterations of Tribes as well. Every version of the game, every sequel, every offshoot has its own aims that that it does, and therefore you're going to have groups of people that tend to like one version over the other. And so
I don't know if he's going to say the things I'm about to say, but that's one of the things that somewhat boggles the mind, right? Because even in the community now, there's people like, just remake X, one of the iterations. And I think the moment the accident that was Tribes 1, because it was sort of an in-between game that wasn't supposed to be what it became, and then trying to grasp and formalize what that was, always put it a little further from its origin. Like Tribes 2 was a good iteration for many, but already a step away from what it was before. And we've seen this steady dilution. Is this a good thing? Many games we've seen that are popular now are dilutions of what came before. Because back then we, the gamers, the competitive gamers, the guys playing these kind of games wanting to get better, were a very small subset of people who had computers, who had internet connections. And the general population was still outside playing games of sport, physical things. And then you have your consoles, and then you have all those things that generally, that global population grew, but that percentage of people who were competitive always stayed the same.
So for us, some of our pillars include obviously the movement. I mean, the tribes, even though the story is that it began as a bug, Tribes is all about skiing and jetpacking, and so the movement is just absolutely core. Obviously, Tribes is all about skill shots with projectile weapons as well. The disc launcher, the spin fuser, the projectile weapons, projectile-based weapons, and that kind of aerial dance that you do when you're in these combat situations is pretty unique to the franchise. Tribes,
which is a hard-fought battle in Tribes Ascent, because that started with your general hit scan ARs and other normal guns. It's only through sheer panic in the community that eventually most of the hit scan was removed from Tribes Ascent, and that was during the beta.
Typically has pretty vast open landscapes. I think one of the critiques of the earlier Tribes games is that it was pretty easy to get lost in the internal bases that were kind of under the ground sometimes. I remember sometimes I would just have to kill myself when I was learning the game, just so hopefully I'd spawn near somewhere I could get out. Part of that
broadside
graphics too, where the walls tended to look the same, but you really had to understand the corridors and learn that map knowledge. Whereas when you go out to the landscape, it's a completely different set of rules with how you engage in combat. And then obviously it's a multiplayer game. There have been a couple of more I guess like Vengeance had a little bit of had the single player campaign, and Tribes 2 had like an onboarding thing which had some single player and bot stuff, but its focus is multiplayer. So movement, skill shots, vast landscapes, and multiplayer to me just like really sums up a lot of the high level design around Tribes. And so for me, a Tribes game has to nail all of those things really well. So then you move on to some of the more specifics, and we can go there. I think there's a lot to cover there, so I'm interested in seeing what specifics you'd like to cover on that. But yeah, it's always a delicate balance between staying true to what gamers expect, but then also modernizing and bringing in a whole new generation of gamers that have never played Tribes.
Which is one of the most important conversations we're having even internally amongst these grizzled elites, as some people refer to them. That my opinion right now, and let's see if any of that gets addressed, my opinion right now is that it's been long enough for Tribes. Because we've already had the conversation. We've said that things have always derived things from Tribes because it was a pillar. It was one of those core pedigree games of the late 90s, 1998. Along with Quake and StarCraft and stuff like that, that influenced games forever. but we've never had the undiluted version, because Tribes Ascend, let's face it, was safe. It was a reduction. It started with the hit scan ARs. It had problems with the maps, hence I became the obsessive avatar of mapping that I am now. And it's something that I've said in the feedback channel as well. Maybe it's time to not pull back, because there are other conversations. This is not a simple discussion. This is high-end game design talk. And I'm perhaps not qualified to talk about anything except for the maps and my obsession. But there are a few things that came out recently. Again, not the movement shooters. Yes, you can butt slide in Apex. Woo! But that's not it. Things like BattleBit that show that the original formula, without all the bullshit, does have some merit.
Absolutely. Well, I guess to kind of throw that back at you, what I'm interested in kind of discussing is, Tribes has a steep learning curve, I think, with the skiing, and then you're up in the air. Now you have to figure out not only how do you go fast, but how do you aim while you're going fast? How do you hit these projectile weapons? How do you lead players? How do you hit the splash damage so you get, And so all of that can be pretty intense, especially for maybe younger gamers who are coming from, let's just throw out Call of Duty or something like that, where it's a completely different aiming style. It's a little easier for myself to pick it up because I'm used to rocket launchers and Quake, which they have a similar route. So I guess, what are some approaches to the design of the game that you're trying to take or plan to take to make it so these new players don't just get demolished right out of the gates from older guys who've been playing it since '98?
Because one of the pillars of the game is reinventing the thing that in every other game you take for granted, which is how to move. Obviously, there's nuances, and different games can move in different ways. But generally speaking, you in a modern shooter, you have your sprint key, you have your crouch or prone or whatever, and then you have your WASD movement, and it's pretty similar. With Tribes, a lot of that's being reinvented. We have to teach the player, and the players have to learn how to properly ski, when to use their jetpack, all the nuances that come in the skiing and the physics. Plus, any of the kind of weird edge cases that become kind of beloved little quirks. Like in Tribes Ascend, we had this little issue called rock bouncing, where you could redirect your velocities, and when we attempted to fix it up, we had a cohort of the people say, no, we have to keep that in, because that's part of our routes, and that's part of the charm of the game. Emergent gameplay! With that, we are embracing the fact that we know that it can be fun to learn a challenge. And there are a lot of games, some shooters, many not shooters, where that fun of iterating on a challenge and honing your skills is part of the big reason why you want to play more and get hooked. Obviously, the challenge there is that if it's too tough, you could get really turned off really easily and just get completely wiped. And that can happen very often in games. And honestly, back in Tribes Ascend, that was something that we saw, and the extreme case of that is if you have a new player that doesn't really know what they're doing, they're still learning the ropes, and they're in a match with somebody who really understands what they're doing, they're both miserable because one player is just getting killed all the time, and the experienced player isn't being challenged. And so we learned a lot from that experience, plus our experience of working on other games. So we want to make sure that we embrace the fun of learning a challenge. The second is, I think it's very...
One of the key things is that the pillar that he described in Tribes Ascend got flipped upside down. Because in every other Tribes game, you had easy to gain speed, hard to maintain speed. Because you had to get into the terrain, you had to keep up with the terrain, and of course your jets were very powerful in T1 and 2. In Ascend, they were not. And it was very hard to get up to speed, requiring for the most part to disc jump, because you had your regenerative health to disc jump. Rocket jumping, disc jumping, impulse behind you, damaging yourself to get up to speed is a 3-step learning process. That is, even in Quake, the birthplace of the rocket jump, not always used, very rarely even used, except for maybe in Clan Arena, which is a subset of Quake again. So that initial onboarding, that again got screamed, we screamed into the ether about that. The first problem TA had was the movement. A lot of people accepted it after a while, but made the onboarding more difficult. This has almost the opposite problem. Now that everything has been refined over the last month or so, the movement is incredibly easy, and it is, you have your little jet jump, your little ski jump impulse that starts when you start skiing. The maps right now are very forgiving, and it is very easy for everyone to get up to a certain speed without doing that disc jump. Good, yes. Does it trivialize some things? Maybe.
Very important, especially for onboarding, that players understand what it's like to experience these core pillars of the game.
Yeah.
If they can understand that this game is about movement and it's about these projectile-based gameplay and these skill shots and some of the more nuanced roles that you play, if they can be exposed to that and understand, even without anywhere near mastering any of those things, they can understand that they can get excited about honing those skills. And you mentioned before, like Rocket League. I think that's a really good example of this, where, you know, in Rocket League, you're scoring your first goal pretty quickly when you're starting the game, but there's a whole depth that is there that you can just kind of uncover and hone in through your gaming career with that game. And so I think it can be very similar in a game like Tribes. Third is, you know, previous Tribes games typically threw you into multiplayer situations rather aggressively. It was the onboarding experience was a little rough, especially in a game like Tribes Ascend, where you have a shooting arena, you can visit a map, you can practice your routes, that's all great. But in order to truly understand what the game is about, it was, you know, you were put against other players. And so at this stage of development, the main focus is iterating on the core gameplay mechanics. But we do want to introduce better ramp-ups to what it's like to play Tribes for new players. And then kind of my final note on that is that I think that, yeah, Tribes, the original Tribes came from iterations from the shooter genre of the, I guess, the boomer shooters or whatever they would be called now, the arena shooters. But
well, let's not use that. But Tribes came from a pedigree of a Mick game, right? That's why we had so many weapons, so many loadouts, so many things to load up into a character. It was supposed to be like a subset of that, more than I think Quake.
I also think that there are more gamers now that have been conditioned with movement mechanics in other shooters, and like Apex and things like that, where sliding plays a key role in that game, or some of the more faster movement games that have come out recently.
Well, the sliding is because you have big maps and you have to traverse them, and they didn't want to input vehicles, even though there is one in there right now. But it is rather ironic that it's always, again, that initial dilution. The problem with Quake of movement is, of course, because it's invisible. You have to strafe jump, you have to move your mouse, you have to jumping. You need to know these things, and you can't learn them. Most of the movement in these new games now is completely ability-based. Or you activate something, you do something with your character. Look at Overwatch, right? Pharah, their jetpack is literally an ability. You have to jump up. So all of this has been codified. And now, right now, maybe indeed it is time to reintroduce the idea of a core movement mechanic that has incredible amount of depth on its own, skiing and jetting together, two components. Is that enough? Does it have to be attached to a button? I hope not.
And some of these other games that were inspired by Tribes. I think that there's actually a very large potential audience for people who would be interested in this kind of challenging gameplay, and I think it would be a really fun experience for those players to hone in those skills.
Awesome, thank you for all that explanation. Yeah. I was going to ask us some other questions, but you're talking about onboarding, so I kind of want to go to that for a second before I forget.
Oh, yeah.
I have one suggestion from me personally, and then I have a couple questions about it. My suggestion is, in your training mode, I think it'd be extremely helpful if you had a ghost-like player running routes that you could try to chase and follow, kind of like a racing game. So new players
exists in TA modding.
You know, maybe find one of these Tribes pros to run a route, record it, and then have that ghost player running the route, and then you could chase them around the map. That could be something interesting on a teaching tool on how to help people learn some routes.
That's a great point. We've discussed that internally. I've looked into making that actually. I wrote a tool internally right now that lets you record your routes, and then we can analyze them. We can take a look at data
Perfect.
as you're going through the routes for various
Beautiful.
reasons. But we've been talking about maturing some of that tech into exactly what you're talking about.
That's awesome. And then my other kind of
Absolutely
question
perfect.
about onboarding and training modes is, in the future, could you see having like an offline, maybe single player learning experience, maybe even with bot opponents or something like that, a mode like that for new players?
Absolutely, yes. So the current time trials that's in the game right now is just the very first glimpse at a essentially offline. You're still connected to the game, obviously, but you're in an offline situation, and so we're looking to mature that vector of, I think there's a lot of really cool things you can do along that path of learning mechanics, learning games, and really experiencing movement and targeting and things like that, not only for training, but for its own kind of gameplay purposes. But then we also have resources right now working on our player bot logic. Player bots is something that we always wanted to do in our previous Ascend games, and we did do it in some of our games like Smite, Paladins, and things like that. As you can imagine, it's pretty tricky when the fundamental pillar of movement is radically changed. But we have a great team of AI programmers actually working on that task right now. So that is cool.
All right. That's really cool.
So one of the first suggestions that was being made as well, like one of the first conversations I was a part of in the Discord as well, was to make the onboarding very snappy and, you know, immediately connected to some kind of leaderboard. Like your first little tutorial, tiny micro tutorial is just ski down this hill and make it to there. And if you make it to there, you suddenly get a scoreboard. By the way, you were the 500,000 slowest person to do that. When you want to try again? Those like little incentives to just not really have a tutorial, but just have, by the way, this is what is expected of you. And these are things, because we're talking, maybe it'll come up later as well, but like for the roles as well, show people the things that are expected, the things that exist. Show the roles, show the things. Like, by the way, not just the perks, but the perks can be misinterpreted as being abilities, right? Which they are currently, but I mean, they are attached to the role, but it should be made explicit, like, hey, we're expecting offense, we're expecting D and cappers and chasers and all those things. The AI bots, by the way, yeah, if that manages to work and we get, because that I feel is an element of, because he kind of alluded to that, that was frozen in Tribes Ascend, right? The tutorialization, the ability to train, and having bots that do more than just jet around in a pattern, which is still very useful, but that is definitely a thing that just got frozen in Tribes Ascend development. Because to me, I still say this, Tribes Ascend was half finished when it went into maintenance.
I think that will really help. So that's
yeah, I agree. I mean, going back to like what you're talking about with like Quake or Unreal Tournament and things like that, you know, back in the day, whether it was because you had internet issues or because you wanted to hone in your skills, it was really important, at least for me and probably another large cohort of players, to be able to play against bots in order to onboard.
For sure.
Yep.
Well, going back to, you know, new players versus veteran players.
Riveting gameplay.
I know projectile speeds has been a big source of back and forth with the community, and then you have the inheritance sliders, which has been really cool, by the way, for me personally, to kind of adjust those around and figure out what works. Is the inheritance slider going to be something that you're planning to keep, or is that something that you're just kind of using to gather data and then you're going to switch it to something permanent once the game launches? What's the plan with that?
Yeah, so what we found with the inheritance slider, in case anyone isn't aware of what that is, so in a game where you have projectile gameplay and you're also moving very quickly, you have this whole concept of, if I'm aiming at, if I'm moving forward at a very fast pace, turn my camera 90 degrees and aim at something, where should my projectile go? And you'll have some people that say it should go where my reticle was pointing when I shot the weapon, because that's where I wanted to aim. And you have others that say it should act more realistically. If I threw a baseball out the window, if my car is traveling 60 miles an hour, that baseball will start with an initial velocity of, or initial speed of 60 miles an hour. How much inheritance does that projectile get? And so we found that one early way of handling this problem was to simply create different types of disc launchers and spin fusers and things like that. And that
The alpha way to do
way to go. However, that is problematic in two reasons. One is that typically people have a play style that they enjoy and they'll stick with it. They won't say, you know, I'm going to do this inheritance thing and then I'm going to, like, full inheritance, then I'm going to do no inheritance. and I'm just going to kind of go between those two things depending on my role. It really comes down to your personal preference of playstyle. And so instead of locking out a set of weapons that you would probably never be interested in, and having to make sure we had to support all these variations on all the weapons that we cared about inheritance on, we wanted to try and experiment where we exposed that to the player. Our current aim right now is to allow that to continue to be a user preference. We don't think that there is necessarily a really high advantage
No.
over one or the other. It's really one of those things that it's to the comfort of the player.
One could argue for the forward inheritance, but again, that changes also depending on what role you are playing. So yeah, inheritance also depending on if you are the person going fast, you want the inheritance there, because if you're standing still and you have a high inheritance, that's an awful thing to have. So yeah, I think currently there's no problem there to have the slider. It was a good thing. It might be a little weird to some, but really isn't an advantage thing.
And that also
50%.
something we can talk about a little bit later on, but the fact that we want to make sure that it's a multiplayer game and players can come on well match made and that kind of thing, but we also want to make sure that we give players the control to modify the game rules and the game settings and things like that as they see fit. And so this is also in that vein.
No,
Perfect.
I think it's great. I was really hoping to hear that answer because, like I said, I personally enjoy the sliders. And when I initially was writing the questions for this interview, I was suggesting we have some sliders for custom matches, and then a patch or two ago, you guys came out with sliders for custom matches. So it was like, oh my gosh, this is great.
Which is good, and so, people have legitimately been using that, right? Halsey has been testing things with the gravity increases and stuff. So proper alpha testing is being done with those abilities, and people are taking this very seriously in the community.
So, well, let's talk a little bit about the competitive scene of Tribes because of
there you go.
How
there is
a
one
foundational aspect of the Tribes community. You have the veteran competitive group, and then of course you have the public casual group. I know that Projectile Speeds has
one is wrong, one is right
there because they were a little bit too fast with the hitboxes, maybe a little bit too big, and so you guys have kind of been adjusting things back and forth to find that balance. A big part of the playtest has been switching health values on armors and it seems like you guys are just kind of throwing a lot of stuff out to kind of see what sticks. Is that kind of the philosophy here as you're approaching these playtests, kind of honing it in and tuning it? And I guess my main question in the same vein on that is, why don't you guys just look at past Tribes games, see what really worked well, and then just adapt it into Tribes 3? Or are you preferring this method where you're just kind of starting fresh, so to speak, and just kind of throwing stuff in there and then
I might have said one of those two things.
There's a lot to unpack there. There's kind of
it's a big question.
No, and that's cool. Let's get into it. There's kind of three main things there. There's the question about the competitive scene, and then there's the question about one of the specific things, which is one of the cores of one of the pillars of Tribes, which is the projectiles and hitboxes and that kind of thing. And then there's the why don't we copy and paste some of these things from the past, all related, obviously. So real quick on the competitive scene. So in competitive and ranked, those are really the lifeblood of modern multiplayer shooters. It's very important to make an experience that resonates with people on that front. And like I said before, I do think that the thing I'm excited about is that I think that there are a lot of gamers that are actually more ready for this kind of game than ever before.
EA didn't have ranked, by the way. It was servers and it was pugs, and that was it.
And so I'm excited to see not just the veterans and seeing their amazing skills with our with how we're shaping up the game, but then also seeing the new ones come in. But yeah, we have to kind of walk that line between staying true to the expectations that gamers have coming into any game, and so with Tribes, that's no exception. But we also have to be bold enough to understand what resonates with modern audiences and what we're trying to do with the game that we're making. Our philosophy is different philosophies depending on what studio develops which games. Our philosophy is that we can theory craft all we want, but we like to experiment, and the weekly alpha tests that we've been doing with the community for the past months, weeks, whatever. And we also internally test daily, sometimes multiple times a day. That is our way of iterating and solving problems. Where if we have something that comes up that we're debating, whether to go path A or path B, sometimes we'll talk it through and we'll say, you know what, it makes sense to go a certain way. Other times, though, we will try it out and we'll see, and we want to get feedback. We want to see what works and what elements don't work. And there's definitely challenges working that way. I think that systems tend to be pretty intricate, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But it's not necessarily as modular as some of these decisions tend to be sometimes. Should you have full inheritance or no inheritance? Well, that might be a modular decision, but that has implications that go beyond that one decision. That shapes other decisions in the whole game.
What he's trying to say here is that in iterative design, I mean, let's face it, with this community, you're going to get an instant response better than your QA department will ever be able to surmise. The thing is, of course, yeah, things are moving at different paces, and you can't implement one thing immediately, but your players are going to see a little slice of that. So towards the community, and I've been caught as well. My problem has been the anxiety of Tribes Ascend coming back, not knowing when the development will stop, right? With all of this talk of early access and everything. So every time we get a little morsel, we immediately evaluate it as the potential last spot. Is that a healthy thing to do? Absolutely not. Is that something we can control? Most of the time, not. A lot of rancorous replies, I really need to use that word, and I do it often because that is exactly it. People who have been clamped and onto this thing for so long, changes are sometimes, difficult to take.
Game. And so, a long-winded way of saying that iteration is how we make games, and we found that it's not as much throwing things up to the wall and seeing what sticks.
Which is why I made the communication post as well, because we need to hear what is going on. They're doing this now. This is happening now. That is alleviating a lot of the stress.
But it's not as random as that, but at the same time, we would much rather field test controversial things, and controversial meaning things that we're not sure what the answers is sometimes. We'd rather field test these things rather than theory craft. And a good example of that, which you brought up, is the projectiles. The kind of easier thing for us to decide early on in this game was that we were not going to go down the hit scan route. We did that in Tribes Ascend. And one of the reasons why we did that in Ascend was because even in those days,
it wasn't done.
The idea of having mostly projectile-based gameplay was pretty foreign to a lot of the current modern gamers that are playing the more military type shooters. In retrospect, I think that did dramatically affect the core fundamental pillars of what it means to be Tribe. So we're staying away from that in this game. Obviously, you have I guess like the shock lance or something like that. Like you might have like exceptions or a shotgun or something like that where we will rely on an instant trace on a particular short range situation, but we're trying to stay away from any of that stuff.
I think it didn't just do that, it damaged Tribes Ascend because a lot of that development had to be restarted mid-beta, and a lot of the projectile weapons were hilariously overpowered. Like, it is a good comparison now to Tribes 3. One of the weapons, the NJ4, I believe, on the Raider class, which is basically a medium with a grenade launcher and a chain gun called the NJ4, it was doing 140 damage, and it was shooting faster than most of the chain guns right now. And the damage, a light had 800 HP. Yeah.
So now we take a look at the projectiles. Okay, we're a projectile-based game. What do you do about it? It's a hard thing to hit a target that's going at several hundred kilometers an hour. It's a hard thing when you're also moving in oftentimes an opposite direction. And you have a gun that has a variable amount of inheritance, depending on like what gun you have or what settings you might have on there or anything. So it is a hard thing. But to me, that
if you're both going fast in the same direction, it is incredibly easy. But you have to understand that you're no longer supposed to lead your weapon, because that's when the inheritance goes. You need to know when to lead, and that is one of the core problems that that Tribes has that you have to learn, that you have to teach people. Like, hey, this weapon, the logic is hard if you are in variable speeds, it is harder. If you're together, it is easier.
That's one of the pillars. That's one of the pillars of the game. It is to be a challenging game that you can use your skills. And so we have to walk that line again of making sure that players can land shots that they want to land, but it's not a given. And the only way to really arrive at something that makes sense is for our normal play, what I'm calling our normal play, which is where you queue up and you're in a match, is to iterate and find out where is that line between it's just so hard that it's frustrating, and then people won't want to play, or it's so easy and it violates and there's nothing more to explore. And so that's kind of the philosophy around our iteration.
And that was a juggernaut of the hitbox change then, right there, which ruffled a good number of feathers, but also had those few casual people go, oh my god, I finally hit my first shot. Yeah, but you should have done that 3-4 months from now. That is still in the core of this game. In Apex, you're not gonna hit all the Kraber shots, even though that's a fraction of the gameplay there, of course.
On hitbox size and projectile size. Now, our goal also is to expose some of these values to custom matches, so that if we do have cohorts of players that want to play with much smaller projectile sizes, so it's harder to hit people, we hope to give them that option.
Interesting.
So that, if you have your veterans, or for whatever reason a group emerges around saying, this is our ideal way of playing tribes, we don't want to stand in the way of that. But at the same time, we're really sensitive to making sure that we don't create a game that is just going to drive people away because they can't get a shot.
In principle, I disagree with that, because then you split the game up. You'll have your mods of the game, and those things have always existed. But initially, and I don't want a version of the game, especially the competitive version of the game, to be a different set. That has destroyed many games. Like the Team Fortress 2 was one of the most popular shooters ever created, but its competitive version was different, was community made, because the developer did not engage in that. And that's why it never was. Or it was for a period of time. Sorry, Seagull, and all those people that did play semi-professional to professional tribes, TF2, not T2. But it didn't last because it was too different from the happy, fun, casual things that were going on in the normal servers.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me personally, as a new player, a couple patches ago, maybe it was a little easy, but it started to feel really good for me, starting to hit those mid-airs, and that's such a rush for the tribes player to be able to hit that shot. And so when you're new and you have struggled to hit it for a couple playtests like I did, and then all of a sudden I'm hitting them more, I know that there was a lot of controversy with that within the community with the new players versus the veterans and how easy it was and stuff, but just as a new player personally, it was really satisfying to start to have that experience. And so I think that's a very smart way of approaching it. And I think the fact that you guys have added all these sliders in the custom matches, I think that's great that you're kind of have this modular slider system, so to speak, for lack of a better way of terminology.
On a macro level, I think it would be beneficial for all players if many people coming into the game could experience what it's like, the thrill of going fast, the thrill of landing that first blue play special, and getting exposed to those things in a way that I think previous Tribes games struggled with. And then once you have those people onboarded, there might be communities that come out that they want a even more hardcore experience in certain areas, and projectile speeds is definitely, or projectile sizes is definitely one of those.
Well, continuing to speak to the competitive community,
or you make your beginner map saying I hate this idea, but it has a point. You have your beginner maps and you have your advanced maps that maybe unlock at a certain stage in the competitive scene or whatever. That's also gating the content. That's not a good idea. But have the bigger maps that have less frequent encounters at higher speeds, or you balance them out with proper map design. Hi, I'm here. that could work more than, I would say, have the in-groups created that play the more difficult game.
I'm curious about plans for more support for competitive play, like a spectator mode for shoutcasters or the ability to record demos. Is that something that you can speak about?
The demo debate.
Okay, so there's a tournament that's going to be happening this weekend. I'm looking forward to seeing it. But it's very
It's pre-tournament.
we don't have the spectating and the tournament rules and all of that. Not tournament rules. The spectating rules and all that kind of stuff. That the game code for that all written quite yet. It is on our list to support, and the good news is that we have a strong esports background. I wrote the spectator system in Smite and Paladins and Realm Royale.
There you go.
So we know how to do it. It's not a trivial amount of work, but
no.
Since, when we release a game in alpha testing, it's true alpha testing. As you can see, we're really testing
nuts and bolts. I love it.
And so it's simply one of those things where it's on our internal roadmap, but we have not released a formal set of those tools yet. In terms of demo recording, I would love to be able to do that. I think that would be really cool. But
however,
even like that ghost thing that you were talking about before, having some element of that. But yeah, I do think that it used to be that back in the old school days of our shooters, that the way you shared a match was you recorded a demo and then you downloaded it and played it in the client. Obviously, streaming radically changes a lot of that. Makes it a lot easier for people to stream or record their YouTube clips and then share it that way. And so we'll have to see what makes sense with the level of effort required. But yeah, that's kind of where we are on that. One of the things that you touched on in the previous question, which we didn't really go too much into, is why don't we copy and paste the past? I think it's true that there could be an audience for like a strict HD remaster of one of the previous Tribes games.
Okay, hang on. Before we get into that, the demo debate was one of the core things in Tribes Ascent, because every single other game of Tribes had that ability. And yes, we were at the cusp of streaming and YouTube and all those things, and all of that was happening. And again, I was a caster then too. It might have been a bad thing that we proved that we can cast a tournament using VODs. It only took APC's sanity. But there is one thing that I want to stipulate, that the longevity of Quake is in showing the skill of its players in montages, in those VODs, in those recordings. So much happens in a Tribes match. We've had this happen in the tournament where an incredibly important play was missed by both me and APC because it was over in a blink of an eye at the other side of the map, and that was Jazz's play, his return on the flag, and we had to go, and thankfully he was streaming and we could see a clip, so one of the core moments of the tournament could be captured. If you have a demo, yes, it takes a Herculean amount of effort, but you could have a legendary match frozen in time to be recorded from every single angle like a multi-million-dollar production. That is what elevates those moments and puts them in history. Also, for review purposes and for esports purposes, it is much easier to have a demo of a game and check what the hell was going on. That's another thing. But we lost that. One of the things, I was given a 1-to-1 with high-res at one point because I wrote it wasn't 50,000 words, but it was 16,000. But everyone thought it was longer because it was a monolith of an article. Basically, my last plea to the developer was given a talk, and he's like, okay, what are the core things you want? And I, of course, wanted to scream maps at the top of my lungs. That was number 2. But I knew that the competitive community wanted those demos. It is non-trivial. I know this, because the data is not streamed the way it was. I understand the mechanics of it. But as a cherry on top, it would be an amazing thing for the content creators of the scene.
Where, that'd be pretty cool to see, Star Siege Tribes, pretty much the same game, but just all in 2024 graphics. But that's not really our aim right now. We do want to provide a lot of those knobs that we were talking about to capture some of those mechanics that might be in one version or the other. But there's still a wonderful set of communities around a lot of the previous Tribes games. And for a lot of folks, that's what that particular iteration that they love is what they want in a Tribes game. There's not a unified, like, this is how the game works in the Tribes community. Every game has some dramatic iterations that appeal to fans in different ways. I think that, and kind of what we were talking about before, where these modular pieces of topics, how fast you ski, how easy is it to shoot a spin fuser, what's the loadout situation, all these kinds of things. Those are modular things that people can discuss, and obviously we iterate on a lot of those things, and we take feedback, and we're designing around those things. But they also are intricately connected with each other. And so our main thing is making sure that we complement those pillars that we were talking about earlier.
I think one of the core things that the Tribes community, new and old, must do, perhaps, if the chance is given in this iteration of Tribes, is to boil down what such a remake should be at the minimum. If people make their lists, make their considerations, and have the conversation, like if we boil Tribes 1, 2, Vengeance, maybe even Ascend, boil it all down, what is the baseline? And I think we can get there. I don't think that's unrealistic. The details and everything, and your grapplers and your bucklers and your, those kind of silly things, sure, fine. The core principle, for instance, smooth ski. I think we're mostly settled on the fact that we're not going back to T1 skiing. Sorry. Giant terrains as far as the eye can see. Right? Things like that. I think we can get there.
And just making sure that nothing that we do kind of goes against those pillars, unless one of the pillars has to change, which I don't think it does for this. So as we were saying before, it's been a franchise for 25 years, and so there's been a whole lot of different things. There's been extremely inventive game modes. I mean, one of them is one that I really liked back in Tribes 2 is called Bounty, and where it's essentially a precursor to what Assassin's Creed multiplayer became, of where everyone has a target and you don't know who's targeting you. And there's some really cool gameplay with that. So, copy and pasting from a previous Tribes game might not be as straightforward as it might seem when talking about a particular issue. However, we are also doing our best to understand what mechanics were and what decisions were made in previous Tribes games. And even on Ascend,
why.
like people who played Ascend, it patched later in its life some things that went against what the original Tribes Ascend pillars were, and introduced things that were a little more classic in Tribes. And even those additions to the game were controversial with the Ascend audience, because some of them really liked the fact that it was more classic, and others thought that the game suffered because of some of those changes. So it's hard to be unified on those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that no matter what you do,
As long as I
you're
agree
gonna
with you,
have
it's
some
fine.
people happy and some people unhappy. It's just that comes with the territory. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and but also a genre has to evolve, and it has to evolve for a modern gaming market as well. Just as a Quake player with Quake Champions, and then adding all the abilities for the champions. For me personally, I wasn't a fan of it, but a lot of people were. We're kind of
you already have your game.
Quake Champions. It was supposed to bring the game to a new audience. What it did instead was take every single movement system that Quake has ever had, not simplify it, not even abilityfy it, but put it on different characters. One character was CPM8, the other one was V-Quake, the other... What? That game killed a build-up that I was a part of for a better part 2 years. There were so many Quake games that were all building up, and everyone was playing the game again, was learning the game again for this large release. I'm over it.
You already have Quake, you know?
Yeah,
if you like,
exactly.
If you're a hardcore Quake 2 player, or yeah, a hardcore Quake 1 player, and you love the Bad Place map or whatever, and like that's your game, great, that's your game.
Yeah,
play it.
Exactly. Well, we're starting to get towards the end of my questions here, and I do have some kind of pointed, roadmap-y, early access-y content questions, and I know that some of these might not be able to be answered, and so we can just, if you just say nope, sorry, skip this one, that that's fine. But I got to throw them out there while I have you here. I hope you understand that. So vehicles are talked about a lot in Tribes. Do you guys have plans for any vehicles or bigger maps that can accommodate those?
Okay, so vehicles, it could happen, but no immediate plans. So vehicles are a legacy for some playstyles in the franchise. We did do them. We had them in Ascend. They were a lot of fun in there, especially matches where there are kind of larger scale battles going on. But there's some really interesting gameplay that happens when you're in a strike and or a grab cycle, or coordinating with another player in a Beowulf tank or something like that. One of the things actually in Ascend that we made but we never shipped was the Herc, where you could like transport your team. And the reason why we never shipped it was because it became really annoying in our internal tests when a quarter of your team were up in a vehicle while the rest of the match was being played out capturing the flag. Now,
Because the team was too small.
It
Yeah.
was a complete disaster in the previous Tribes games, but vehicles add a particular kind of element and a very particular kind of dynamic to how a match plays out, and it's simply not on the focal point right now. Right now, the focal point is figuring out ideal match size, and obviously opening up things for custom matches to be for the community to do what they want with them. But in terms of like, what does it mean to hit play and play a tribes match, we're really hyper focused on the core PvP rules without vehicles being a part of that. The core rhythm of the PvP combat, if that makes sense. The high-speed movement, the weapon feel, and the game rules. And vehicles kind of are an addition to that could happen, but it's not a part of our core game at the moment.
Okay. And then you guys have been throwing out a lot of new game modes, which is awesome. The Team Hunter, I'm personally really enjoying a lot, because that's more of like a team deathmatch style, which I love. So are you gonna, you talked about the bounty just a little bit ago. I know there's Rabbit. Are you guys thinking about more game modes? And then also in the same question, how do you come up with all these new game modes and then not split the community, fracture the community in a bunch of different queues, and then the player base gets super watered down, and it takes 20 minutes to find a match?
Exactly. Well, we know we don't want to do that. We know we don't want to, especially when we're in this like hyper iterative alpha stage of the game. So part of the way we do that at this stage of the game is sometimes we'll change around what's in a queue, or we'll want to focus a particular type of game mode to get a particular kind of feedback on it. And so we'll direct players there. But as you can see in either this patch that was this week or maybe last week, I forget which one, is introduced, where we have basically a rolling queue that will change the game mode. So you're not saying I want to play this game mode and then you play it. It can be a rolling experience. Obviously in customs you can do whatever you want. You can play the same game mode all you want.
Overwatch does and works well.
That's one
it's fine.
method that we use for not fragmenting the community. In terms of coming up with game modes, obviously there's so much rich opportunity for how to experience high-speed movement, projectile-based gameplay, big wide open maps. And so the iconic core game mode of Tribes is of course capture the flag. So we knew we had to start with that. That had to be.
Or you would be lynched.
But
yes.
We also have found that games can benefit by having various levels of. It's almost like a emotional excitement curve that can happen, and various games do it very differently. But I think good game modes kind of play with that curve. And what I mean by that is a team deathmatch or deathmatch is going to be kind of you're always on. You're always fighting for survival. The rhythm of that kind of gameplay is different than if you're playing in let's say a 6v6 CTF match where you all have a role, and you're going to be playing as a heavy on flag, and you're communicating with your team. Your mids are at the midfield.
Shots.
Your mediums are in the midfield communicating with you. Hey, there's a flag grabber coming in, and lay your mines down now, or get prepared for this. Get your flag chase. There's a lot more coordination happening in that mode.
Player, put your mind down now. He's a heavy player. He's a Hoff player. Informs us a little bit, huh?
And so the rhythm of the game and the way that plays out can be dramatically changed, obviously, by the rules of the game. And so what we're wanting to do right now is explore kind of some of those extremes of what are different ways that players would have fun playing tribes. And so the bomb run game mode was
Good
one that
shot.
we introduced last week, where you pick up a bomb in the field and then try to score it. So it's got almost a little bit more of like a football feel to it, a little bit,
A,
a little bit more
a
like
little bit of a
sporty
Rocket
feel to it.
League.
Team Rabbit had something that was quite similar. So anyways, so there's that kind of approach, and then the newest one with Hunters, we've got several more TDM style game modes that we're working on internally, and the other TDM style one that we're toying around with, we'll see if it makes the light of day or if it's worth it or not, is where it's a true team deathmatch, but there's a one flag, and so if you are carrying the flag, then if your team has the flag, then you score a multiple, like you score 2 points per kill. And so the problem with tribes, so if you look at like Rabbit, if you play just traditional Rabbit, where it's a free for all, where one player can have the flag, that takes me back to when we were playing Quake, and it'd be like, oh, you're pretty good at Quake. Let's see if all my friends and I can play just against you and see how well you do in that situation.
Yeah.
In fact, that's sometimes easier.
Yeah.
Because now all those other players can't play with each other. They can't frag each other. They can't get their kills off each other. They have to all go against the most skilled player. And that happens in traditional just straight up Rabbit, where you get that player that just knows how to ski and mop the floor with everybody else. Then those other players just can't do they just can't do anything, and it's a lockdown. So I doubt we would see that format in the way that I'm describing it reemerge in Tribes 3. But
Okay.
yeah. So a lot of coming up with game modes is a combination of looking at past Tribes games, which has an abundance of really awesome game modes, but then also looking at what do players like to play in shooters, and what would be the Tribes twist on that.
How about player progression? Any plans for individual account progression?
Play progression is always on our mind, and it's at the core of a lot of the games. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the fundamental of the moment-to-moment gameplay is tuned in such a way that it makes sense to power whatever our progression system is, and that could be variable. And I'd hate to make a promise or talk about something that could change.
Totally understandable. A question for all the modders and mappers out there. Do you think you have the ability eventually to provide mappers and modders with the opportunity to maybe get some of their content into the game, maybe with community hype map competitions run by the Tribes 3 Discord, or even tools to allow them to upload their fan content to maybe...
Okay. Give me a moment. I just want to say, game types are a big discussion that we haven't really opened up. Maybe it's more what the community has been saying is more like wish lists. I think I personally want to give a stab at maybe presenting some game types and stuff, and get your docs out, get the design docs out there. That might change some things, that might inform some things, but probably keeping it simple and bring in some old game types that might have been lost to time, which is, by the way, CTF. This one, however, he did not say adjusting, he said content. Can we bring content into the game? Mapping and modding. Okay, I'm going to hold my breath for this one, I think.
Be like the Steam Workshop or something like that.
I am a huge fan of user-generated content, and I would love to be able to get to that point of where we have the community being able to create their ideas and share them with other people with our games, especially in Tribes. And as you know, modding and creativity in this genre is really huge. The way that we're looking at this is that it's a step process to see if there's enough interest. The disaster scenario is that we would forego iterating on the core things that need to be worked on right now while we're in alpha for a set of tools for something that misses the mark on the entire experience, if that makes sense. So we don't want to put the cart before the horse on this one. So what that means is that as we develop the game, we are very cognizant of we want players to be able to influence a lot of the things that we're making decisions on and iterating with the community on. And there's different versions of that. The most simple version is what we're doing right now with alpha testing, which is we're not putting it in front of players, getting their opinions, getting feedback, surveys, things like that, and iterating with them. Yes, the users are participating, but that's not UGC. That's not really what the modding that you're talking about is. So the next step on that spectrum is the ability to have your own custom game, and that's why we have prioritized that, because we do want to start that process of giving players complete agency of who can play their maps and what the rules are, and changing some radical things around. And we will go through various stages of allowing more and more power under having your own servers and or your own matches that you're hosting custom games on, with the end goal.
He didn't confirm dedicated servers there. He just misspoke. It's the hosting of custom games. All right, calm down.
Goal, hopefully, to release some sort of creative method for authoring even more original content. Now, even that branch has several vectors on it. One is to do it all inside the client, which more and more modern games are doing. Or you can release a set of tools that modders can do, and then go through a submission process.
Honestly, that's not even what we're asking, right? We don't need to do the whole song and dance to author things inside the game, because that is an immense amount of work, especially in Unreal, because that is end stage stuff. No. Honestly, at this point, a lot of us just want to give you a height map or give you a base or whatever. If there is a pipeline for that, just dumping the height maps and putting some prefab bases on there, that would be enough. Especially for grayboxing purposes. If that kind of development can continue even when the game is released, that we have a iterative design within the released game, that could speed up the process in locking down some of these things, like map archetypes, like finding the good maps, and of course keeping them fresh and refreshing them and fixing things. That is just community assisted design. We don't need all the fancy stuff, because again, I think like 20% of the tribes community as it is right now is probably in the industry.
Things like that. The truth is that we have our sights on those end goals, but in order to get there, we need to go through these stages of alpha testing and custom servers and understanding what players really are wanting to do with the game.
Awesome. There's a lot of discussion about the lobby codes. I think the system's great. However, I think a lot of people might prefer a server browser. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's something that we talk about internally. I don't think that I could definitively say either way where it will go. But in Ascend we had a server browser, and
yes,
we'll see where things go. But again, the main thing that we wanted to do was start that process of understanding what our audience and how our audience would like to grow in that area, and grow it with them.
Okay, and now my personal feedback request. I tend to snipe in most games, and I know the BTX has had some controversy and with the way it's been balanced in the energy.
Careful
I'm not talking
now.
about that. I want to talk about the feel of the weapon. It feels a little bit weak when you're shooting it. It doesn't have a strong kickback or animation or sound effect. It's just something I want you to consider for future iterations, because you've got these badass spin fusers, and then this little BTX goes dink.
Yeah, that's really good feedback, and I really appreciate that. That will not go unheard, believe me. That weapon feel is critical for a shooter, and yeah, it's one of those things that it needs to be delivering a 10 out of 10, and we need to identify what weapons are not a 10 out of 10.
Good
Obviously,
fucking show.
Things are always in development, we're releasing new things, we're shifting things around, especially with sniper rifles. One of the interesting things is, as you might know as a veteran gamer yourself, is that sniper rifles can be a tricky situation, especially in a game that has projectiles. With obviously going back to the Quake days, you had the rail gun, and you had
got to be more of a railgun feel, bro. It just needs that power.
Right, and so what we've been playing with is obviously changing the effects to make sure that it's really obvious when that annoying sniper is on the hill, just like obliterating you. But also seeing what opportunities there are on the utility side of sniper rifles. Could there be some interesting gameplay situations that go beyond just straight up damaging? I'm not the lead designer. I'm not a designer on the game, even though we all influence various aspects of the design. So I won't speak too much of the
BTX was a mistake.
The various iterations.
Listen, just make the BTX the bullet sniper that you need to reload. Make the phase rifle the energy one that drains your energy as you shoot. So you can have both play styles, just have a variant of that. Please, no more utility to the snipers, please. I am a sniper myself. I played Tribe Descent as a sniper. I ended people's fun when they were high up in the sky. Okay? I'm speaking from experience. I started mapping to solve the problem of snipers by a line of sight and everything like that. So please, God, no.
To the sniper rifle, but I think that could be one of the explanations of why it might not be as matured as we want it to be in terms of the visual and audio feedback. But I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's just a personal thing.
Punchy. It just
yeah,
feel like
a little more punchy, and then
yeah, sure, make it loud. I don't care.
Maybe even if it lasts just a few milliseconds longer, so as you're shooting those no scopes, you can kind of adjust your shot a little bit easier because you can kind of see where the projectile is going. All right, well, listen. Mick, you've given me almost an hour of your time. It has been an hour. Oh my gosh. I really appreciate this. This has been an excellent interview. Your commentary has been really eye-opening, and I think the community is going to really dig listening to all this. So let's just quickly wrap this up. If you could share with me,
it's amazing that this even happened.
The state you'd like to see the game at before it releases into early access, and then any closing thoughts on that in that same vein. Whatever you want to talk about to wrap this interview up, I'm just going to let you have the mic.
All right, cool. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank you and thank all the wonderful people in our community, whether you are just now discovering the game or you've heard about it or you're a seasoned veteran. We really appreciate the feedback. It's really awesome to be able to share the game in its early development stages and iterate with this kind of feedback. And so
it is brave. They came out first with the closed playtest and then opening it up. To do this to the Tribes community is not a healthy thing. I hope they've steeled themselves and they know, because me, myself, I've pressed the drama button a couple of times because you have to sometimes to get something out. Again, they're talking now. They're doing these interviews. They're doing all these things. That is amazing. But Tribe's Ascent is looming like an elder god. This maddening form reaching from the stars into our very dreams and becoming real again. That is what I'm experiencing with this. I want to know where the buck ends. That's why I'm asking for roadmaps and all these things, just so we don't relive a nightmare.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Obviously, as a huge Tribes fan myself, I think that there is a tremendous opportunity for the gamers of today, the shooter gamers of today, to experience something on the something like what Tribes can deliver. There's nothing quite like it on the market, and I think that it can be a really great way for people who have come back to the game, or might even be still playing one of the older Tribes games and want to try a little bit something different. I think it could be a great way to experience that fun gameplay. And at the end of the day, we're trying to make a really great piece of entertainment that players are just going to enjoy and help us build and grow. And so, in terms of what it needs for early access, we just need to make sure that the game is in a healthy spot, that it's hitting all those pillars really well, and that we continue to listen to you, the audience, and please do your part on giving us feedback and playing with your friends. And that's, I guess, the final thoughts on that.
I have no friends, only opponents.
All right, well, we'll call it there, Mick. Thanks again so much for your time, and we'll see you out there on the battlefield.
All right, thank you so much.
So that was Mick, head of gameplay at Prophecy Games, working on Tribes 3 Rivals. The game is currently in alpha testing on Steam. I recommend everybody go and check that out. A special shout out to Doppelganger of Prophecy Games for helping me set up this interview with Mick. I really appreciate your help with this. We'll see if I can get some more interviews for the future, but if you're enjoying this type of content, please let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. For more Tribes and Boomer Shooter content, I'm Salty Octopus, and I will...
And for your React content.
See you next time. Happy fragging.
All right. Thank you, Salty. You've done this expertly. Thank you very much. And yeah, no, I'm actually surprised this even happened this early on and that we get it in such a elaborate form. So yeah, this informs us of a few things, a lot of things we already knew, but now, or at least we assumed. But yeah, it's good to see or to hear the human behind all of this, because of course there's a lot of generalization, there's a lot of hearsay and assumptions, and again, myself included, with a little bit of knowledge, the Dunning-Kruger effect is of course rather large. I think these kind of communications are critical, especially for a community like Tribes. There is a lot of knowledge in this community. There's a lot of experience in this community. And again, there is a lot of focus and a lot of expectations. This helps tremendously. And going forwards, again, continuing the communication, continuing the explanation, at least allows us to direct that very ugly word called passion. All right. That's all I got. So, thanks for watching, and for me being a third wheel in this conversation here. See you next video.